Hi, folks. This time you're not going to get me talking to you for ages and ages. This time you've got Sam Patel who's going to be talking to you. Sam is the principal at ICOM, the International College of Oriental Medicine in East Grinstead, so that's in East Sussex. He's going to talk to you about stem and branch acupuncture. Now, one of the things that we need to be thinking about all the time is how do we broaden our thinking so that we can bring different dimensions and different ways of thinking to the way that we help all our patients and the people that we work with. So while you might say, well, I don't practice that particular form of acupuncture, I don't actually do that particular way of doing things. This is a way of thinking about things differently. And they just look for those little light bulb moments that goes, I could do that differently. I could use that. So, Sam, can I hand over to you?
Morning, everyone, and thank you, Paul, for the kind introduction. Is the mic okay? Excellent. And thank you to the British Acupuncture Council for allowing me to speak. Today is going to be a talk on stems and branches acupuncture. It will be focusing on the stems and branches style, but looking at it more in terms of cycles, and to hopefully get you to understand that there's a certain depth to stems and branches and how to incorporate cycles of energy into your treatments. So it's a little bit about me to start with. I graduated from ICOM in 1998 and went on to teach there, taught on the Chinese medicine modules, point location, and then on to the clinical modules. I then went on to sorry, I was just being distracted. I then went on to become Director of Studies, and as Director of Studies it gave me a good insight into how a course was developed and delivered, and you get a full picture. Rather than just teaching one aspect of a course, you do get a good overview of what's happening with all of it. And then currently, for the past 4.5 years or so, joint principal at ICOM. So hopefully that overview I can sort of put over into a very simplistic approach to and an introduction to stems and branches. It's quite a complex philosophy, and I'm trying to, well, I'm not going to try and deliver a 3-year course in 1.5 hours. I think I'll do quite well if I can do an introduction to hopefully get you inspired to look a little bit further. My last slide is that there are current books out there published, and it's something for you to hopefully follow up by yourselves or in CPDs that are focusing on stems and branches. The college was founded in 1972 by Dr. Van Buren. His own journey in acupuncture was predominantly stems and branches, and we've taught stems and branches exclusively through all that time, and will continue to do so. It's trying to keep a certain classical aspects of medicine going when, especially in a time where things were moving such a lot into more a symptomatic approach, and trying to go back and actually look at the energies of what's happening in a person and around. And it's incorporating that into treatment. So this is the college teaches the application of stems and branches in a medical setting. So a lot of the books and philosophy that you get, they're probably not translated as much, are on how stems and branches is calendrical and it's focused on time. And if you go to China, their interpretation of stems and branches is chronoacupuncture, and there is a talk on chronoacupuncture, which is specifically doing certain points at certain times. What we're going to be looking at today is hopefully a much bigger picture to all of that, and trying to get a good overview. So, I'm starting with a St. Francis of Assisi, and you know, what we do is work with our hands, our head, and our heart. And it's an art form. It's not only medicine, it is an art form, because each person that you see, regardless of style that you have been taught and are practicing, is a unique individual. And it takes a certain art form to be able to put what you do into action. And where artists are only working with 3 primary colors, we're quite lucky. We're working with 5. So the possibilities that you have at your disposal are infinite, and hopefully it never gets boring. It always keeps you on your toes. So you've got an understanding of what it is that is nature, and it's in its purest form, nature possesses an intelligence, an incomprehensible amount of intelligence. It knows what it needs to do. And it's ranging from how the heart beats, how life is created, how the earth moves around the sun. There's a certain ingrained drive that is based on a certain inherent intelligence, and it's very cleverly designed. And this design also is active in being able to adapt and evolve. And this is where I think people sometimes forget that, you know, we're adapting and evolving all the time, and so is the world out there. It's trying to keep that at the front of your thinking, that what we do as acupuncturists is just helping that whole process along, helping drive it all along. And to have life, a lot of the classical scriptures, not just Chinese, a lot of ancient scriptures describe this aspect of to have life is to have an intelligence. It takes an intelligence to be alive and to have life and to create life. And it's what we're trying to do is to utilize the intelligence. And how do we do that is we use a needle, and it's connecting the outside universe to the inside universe. And our method of making the 2 connections is with a needle. And literally we're threading the 2 together and connecting the 2, so to remind the inner self what's happening outside. And hopefully seeing the results of that and trusting that you've connected them in the right way, and helping your patient to find a certain balance. So we've got this idea of external nature and internal nature. You all have a very good idea of what's happening with the inner workings of the body. Your courses would have taken you through anatomy and physiology, and also in terms of the way Chinese medicine views the body, so the physiology of how the body works, what it does, when it does it. And that's all a very good picture of the internal nature of things, but there's also an external nature of things, and this is more to do with the planets and understanding that they also have a certain energetic influence on us. And we see it every day with the movement of the sun. Daytime, nighttime, we also see it in a very immediate way with the impact of the moon. And it's quite easy to understand that these 2 are having a certain effect on us. on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, and actually through the month, how it affects us. But also now try to think that the planets also have a similar effect on us. We don't see them as much, they're not as visible unless you're an astronomer. And Stems and Branches is looking at the influence of the planets on our inner being and understanding that each planet has a specific energetic impact on us. So I'm going to start with this 1.5 hours is going to be focused more on just trying to get you to understand where the planets sit and how they've evolved, and sort of thread that through into 5 elements, so you've got something to hang on to. I think a lot of people do have a good understanding of 5 elements already. I'm just trying to make that link through to the Stems and Branches. And the whole idea with this is balance and homeostatic balance. These are things we use, the words we use all the time. And you're always explaining to patients that it's, trying to get your body back into balance. But what does that mean? Do you want to only achieve a balance internally and with the physical way the body works, or are we trying to do something a little bit greater? And I think there's nothing wrong in trying to aim for something a little bit greater, and actually, on a universal perspective, try to get a balance between that person within themselves, but also relating it out back to the energies of the universe. And patients often ask, and I'm sure they've asked you, how does acupuncture work? I do give quite a simplistic answer, and it's pretty much the treatment doesn't do anything. It won't cure you, it won't heal you. But what I'm doing is to enable you to be able to heal yourself. And a lot of what we do is trying to instigate this process that gets everything moving back again. And how many times do you use the word stagnation? And what you're trying to do is you're just trying to move energy. Move energy, and how do you move it is down to you and your own particular style, but the net result is that it starts moving and it starts to follow a natural order. It's already programmed to do that, and our job is just to facilitate that in the best way possible. There are lots of ways of doing it and no right way of doing it, but we can only do our best each time. So it's trying to, in the bigger picture possible, the biggest picture possible, trying to get that movement going to facilitate a balance, to facilitate that patient getting themselves back on track. And this can happen physically, and you see it, people go on a similar emotional journey or a mental journey where things are happening and it gets too much. They start getting some treatments and things start to find their place. They start to feel better.
Sorry, you might interrupt a second. I'm just going to move the speaker for people at the back. Is that okay?
It's fine, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
It's fine. I'll ask you questions afterwards. And so this idea of trying to do the, trying to look at a big picture to see how we can help, not just in the here and now, but looking forward a little bit more and trying to anticipate what might be coming up for them. If we've got a good energetic understanding of what problems they might encounter energetically, you can focus the treatment and change the treatments to try and help that and predict a certain movement of energy and try and help that along. So we'll start with something everyone is familiar with, yin and yang. And it all comes down to yin and yang. It's as simple as that. But it's not interesting enough, so we'll make it a little bit more complicated. And within yin and yang, there are lots of interactions and exchanges. And it's, if we look at the movement that is created by yin and yang, you start to get a whole sequence starting with yang. Yang rises, it starts and it reaches a certain peak, and then it turns into yin. So yang, we would have this idea of a creative force, and yin as a nourishing force, and yang to create yin. We can look at that a little bit more specifically, and in terms of cycles, it's always yang and yin, yang and yin, yang and yin. And when we're talking about life, it's always the movement from yang to yin. It doesn't do anything else. It doesn't go backwards. It keeps going forwards. And this is the idea behind a certain movement of the planets, that the movement is always going forward, always going forward. And that very basic cycle is established, a yang and yin cycle, and it's continuous. It's continuous and it's infinite. Now, if we put that yang and yin on a more linear picture, and I've only done a linear picture because I couldn't get it to bend around my diagram, so but hopefully you get the idea. You've got this start, and if we start at the beginning, it starts with yang, and it moves, it moves. Yang reaches its peak, and then it gets to its end, and then it goes on into the yin. And we can see this as day and night. And that day-night movement goes on and on and on. We can also split it down into different parts of the day, different parts of the night. Morning, afternoon, evening, night. Then we can take it and associate that movement of yang to yin and match it to what might be happening with the way the moon is moving. And you have a waxing moon and a waning moon. So there's a yang and yin again. So it's just layers and layers and layers, and we're going to be creating all these layers as we go along. These slides, I forgot to say, these slides, I think they're going to go up on the website on the BAC somewhere. So you'll have all of this once it's up. And so if we going from the moon and a lunar cycle and a monthly cycle, you can also apply it to annual cycles. First half of the year, second half of the year, and so forth. Now, the bigger picture in all of this, you can apply it to quite a few number of years. And again, quite a few medical cultures do recognize that human life should be able to be sustained up to 120 years. If you can maintain good health and live in accordance with nature, there's the rub. You should be able to get to 120 years. So, and this 120 years is what Stems and Branches also recognizes. But we split it down. We split it down into 60. So a complete Stems and Branches cycle is 60 years. Yeah. So the first half of that, the first 30 years is the yang, and the second 30 years is yin. But the first 60 years of the 120 is yang, and the second 60 years yin. And it's by no means coincidence that you get, when people reach the age of 60, their take on life changes, and it becomes more yin. And why does that happen? Because the energies are moving the whole body towards the yin. And it's a lot more reflection, it's a lot more calmer. The first 60 is very active, especially going up to 30 when we're reaching the peak of yang is a very active time of life. And if you look at 30 as a marker, and you can relate that to other aspects of physical workings of the body. Why is it a little bit more difficult for people to conceive after 30? Because they've moved past the peak of yang. They've moved past that whole aspect of being able to create, because yang creates. So you can apply these cycles in lots of different ways, and it's literally just by understanding yang and yin. So we've got this idea of a 60-year cycle. A complete stems and branches cycle is 60 years, but human life over 20 years. So where did this all start? We're going to go right back. We're going to go right back. Where did it all start? It would have started somewhere. And going back into some of the philosophy, it's the term used is universal spark. A lot of people might understand that as Big Bang, moment of creation, and this is in some very ancient textbooks. They use that term, so it's not a new term that physicists have come up with in our lifetime. It's the idea goes back a lot further than that, and this universal spark is the moment that everything started. And from that start, that's a little bit complex, but we're going to break it down in a minute. You have, from the center, 4 emanations. And these 4 emanations are Yuan, Heng, Li, and Zen. And it started, that then also goes on to create Qian. They also have correspondences to other things that we know. And I'm just going to step by step talk through some of those correspondences. So these 4 emanations, so it starts off with the first emanation and the center relating to earth, and the emanation is Qian. And then we have in the very first moment, a movement out in all 4 directions. And this movement is probably a fraction of a second. I don't know, I wasn't there, but it's the way it's described. It's described as it's momentary. And it's momentary because that initial movement out into 4 directions then starts to, so let's go on, starts to give you a certain order, and that order is the first one to evolve would be the emanation of Yuan, and the second one the emanation of Heng, and the third one the emanation of Li, and the last one the emanation of Zen. And if you now follow the dotted arrows, that certain sequence starts everything going. So this is from Qian, the very next movement goes to Yuan. From Yuan, the very next movement leads to the creation of Heng. From Heng, then goes back to Qian. So you've just started something. This is the first 2 are the yang aspect. You've just started something. It then goes back into the middle to consolidate and to transform. It needs that moment to transform before you go into the yin phase. And then from that transformation, it then goes on to Li and then Zen. And there you should start to recognize that there's a certain movement starting with, and I've used the colors there, so it gives you an idea of the elements that they relate to. Everything starts with wood. Everything starts with wood. Then fire, then earth, then metal, then water. And this diagram in the cross is probably the most accurate five-element picture that we know. We'll look at some of the other pictures to understand why they are slightly different, because it describes health and life in a slightly different way. But if we go right back into where it started, this is how it started. So this is, you've got this five elements and the flow in a more recognizable picture as in a pentagon. And from wood, fire, earth, metal, water, you've got the black arrows that give you the Sheng cycle and the movement. And you've got the dotted arrows that are the Kerr cycle and the counterbalance. Together, both cycles working together to give you homeostatic balance. So this actually describes more how the body works as well, and how the five elements, because if we go back into language of early acupuncturists, is they didn't know what went on inside the body, so they had to look at how our processes and match them to what was happening in nature. And this was their best attempt to, and very accurate attempt, to find a certain logic into what's happening. And it's all about movement. It's all about movement of energy. Yang, yin, but also then we can interpret it in different ways through the five elements. And what we do as acupuncturists is tap into points. Now, how many of these points are related to movement? And how many points are related to quality of energy? So all the points that we know are the points that are related to quality of energy tend to be the shu points, the antique shu points. So you've got each one relating to the elements, and they relate to the elements because they have a particular influence on quality of energy. All the other acupuncture points, if you look at the dynamic and how they work, they're all related to movement. So pretty much most of what we do is movement. There's only a very few points that are related to quality of energy. So you've got 12 meridians, and each one has a point, 5 points relating to the five elements. Usually you don't count the Jingwell points because they're so very dynamic. So you've got 48 points on quality, and then you've got the rest on movement. But the quality ones, they're quite powerful, because this is what you're going to be tapping into, a certain primordial movement of energy as set by the universe itself. This is how it all started, and this is the underlying movement that we're all following. So now we've got an order that emerges, and this order is still I'm still talking about the universe and the planets, and it's still in heaven. And again, because I couldn't put it in a nice circular way, I've put it in a linear way. We've got the order that emerges is with the planets. So the first planet that is associated with the emanation of Yuan is Jupiter. And then we've got Mars with Heng, Saturn back in the middle with Qian, and Venus with Li, and Mercury with Zen. So this order starts and is attributed to each planet. And this is important because keeping track of planetary movements tells you which energies are here and now. And this was used then in the calculations. And if you lost your calculations, you could just look up at the sky and find your baseline again. There was the stems and branches cycles started when the planets were all said to be aligned. So day one was when all these planets with the Earth were aligned. And that was proven with one of our students who wrote a dissertation on it. And we always worked with a a mythical date that it started at this particular time. So she took this date, and she had a friend that worked in, I think it was astrophysics, and says, can you tell me at this time where the planets were? And he managed to get a diagram, and they're all in a line. It was, I think, at the first new moon, and that if you look at the numbers, it's 0001, 00014. So the planets were pretty much all in a line. They all lined up, and that was the start of, that's seen as the start of the stems and branches cycle, and very much linked to each of the planets.
Sam, so were they relative to, in a line, were they relative distances from Earth at that time? I mean, was Jupiter the furthest and Mercury?
Yeah, they've always kept their distance. And if you like, with the sun, all the planets going out, they pretty much went out in a straight line. Then the Chinese literature on all of this doesn't, the older language doesn't really refer to the planets in such a way, but you'll hear things like green azure dragon, red vermilion bird. I don't know if you can see that. Yellow dragon, white tiger, and the dark warrior. And we can then also see that as a correspondence and how it relates to wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. So you've got a certain movement of the planets, and that's ongoing. And each planet, in turn, takes a prominence. And in the first yang part of a cycle, it starts with Saturn. And Saturn is the one that is most closely linked to the Earth in terms of energy. And Saturn also has a very precise orbit. It's a precise 60-year orbit. And I've looked at it, and I think that usually you get a slight change in the way planets move and the rhythms that they keep. The Earth is always on a tilt, and the tilt is always moving. The Moon is never a precise orbit, but the Saturn is a very precise orbit, and it's a 60-year cycle. So one rotation of Saturn around the Earth, around the Sun, is 60 years. So it's the whole sequence here starts with Saturn, then it goes to Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, and then Mars. And this is then also followed up with the same sequence, but now in the yin. So you've got a cycle starting with Saturn through the yang phase, and the cycle keeps going through the yin phase, and it keeps going round and round. And these planets keep doing their thing, and they keep representing a year each time that they're doing it. Mostly for this talk, I'm only going to be talking about a yearly cycle. There is also a monthly cycle of stems and branches. There's a daily cycle, and there's an hourly cycle. For those that are very good at mathematics, there's also a minute cycle. But we don't tend to use a minute cycle, especially in treatment, because it changes too quickly. You can't factor it into the treatment. The hour cycle you can, because your patient is with you for within a 2-hour period, and you can incorporate that into the treatment. So the four together, you've got year, month, day, and hour, 4 pillars. And you hear this term 4 pillars in quite a few ways, but this is what it means. And this is what it means, that you've got this idea of certain energetic dynamic relating exactly back to a point in time.
Can I just ask you, where you've got Saturn, Venus and Mercury, well, Venus and Mercury are the yin, aren't they? When you're talking about...
It depends on perspective. Yeah, so you've got, if we go back, you've got all 5 there in a certain order. Yeah, and it's just the way they're moving, and the way they've emerged. Which one emerged first? If we look at it that way, it said that Jupiter emerged first, and then it was Mars, and then it was Saturn, and then it was Venus, and then it was Mercury. So because they emerged in that way, that started an order in a certain way, and we can follow that order with the 5 elements that we attribute the movement of Jupiter to wood, etc., etc. Now that we've got the planets moving in a certain way, when we look at how they affect us, the biggest effect starts with Saturn. Yeah, and then the sequence follows with the others. And Saturn is seen as an instigator, and the relationship to Earth and the energy of Earth and the energy of Saturn being very similar is why they picked it for the sequence to start first. But it's not a matter of, okay, let's pick something to start with. There's a certain order to it, and there's a certain logic to it that makes sense that, okay, what influence is Saturn having on us? It's having its biggest influence in the first year. So remember, we're starting the cycle at day 1, and this is what they see. And the whole philosophy of stems and branches is primarily on metaphysical observation. So it literally is observing the stars and how they're moving, and then how that movement is having a certain effect on us on Earth. Does that help?
Yeah, I'm just still focusing on it, Jupiter and Mars being the yang and the Venus and the Mercury being more yin. So if you're looking at Saturn being the centre, you went that way out first and like that.
Yeah. Okay. No. It's there's a yang dynamic to it, but that doesn't stop it from being yang or yin. It's where your perspective is. And yes, in that picture, there are 2 a little bit more related to yang and 2 a little bit more related to yin. But it doesn't stop whatever is yang or yin having a yang or yin counterpart. So you've got over a 10-year period, first 5 are yang and the second 5 are yin. You've got a certain movement of the planets where each planet takes a certain prominence, and they all take it in turns. They're very friendly. They all take it in turns, and we can attribute that the energies in 5 elements to each of the planets. So we've got earth, metal, water, wood, and fire. In the yang, the cycle is repeated, and we also get that in the yin. Now these are referred to as Da Yun, great movements. And this is said to be the biggest influence on our energy is the great movements. And that's why they're called great movements, because it has such an impact on us in terms of energy. And when we're looking at patients, it's the great movements that we do really pay attention to, because that's our biggest influence. And understanding that in a very simple way, just understanding that does have a bigger influence than other influences gives you a certain idea of what's happening with the energy of this person. Is it affecting them too much, or is it not affecting them enough? And if you can get a bit of a gauge of the impact of great movements on the energy of a patient, then that already sets you up to help them in a slightly different way. And it's not that we neglect any physical pain or discomfort, but very often that physical pain and discomfort, the answer lies in what's happening with a great movement. So if there's inflammation, for example, and there's a great movement, fire, you can understand how certain inflammatory conditions can get a lot worse, especially if that patient, because of their own energy, is susceptible to the great movement of fire. And why do some people sort of have an inflammatory condition and then they have a good year and then they have a really bad year? And if we take that person that they're not having any treatments, there are better and worse years that they experience. And this is part of that picture. So the great movements are predominantly the movement of the planets and how they relate to certain energies in the 5 elements. Now, this heavenly order also influences Earth, and it also influences organs in a certain way. So we've got that heavenly order starting with wood, going on to fire, earth, metal, and water, and its influence is also on organs. So the energy of wood is going to be influencing gallbladder and liver a lot more. They all influence each other, but there's more influence on the gallbladder and the liver. And fire is small intestine and heart, earth is stomach and spleen, metal is colon and lung, and then you've got bladder and kidney with water. We're still looking at a stem level, and at this level we're not really considering pericardium, and we're not really considering Sanjiao 3-heater. And pericardium, we're not looking at the heavenly order because it doesn't yet exist. The energy of a pericardium only is said to kick in at the moment of birth, when the heart valves change and close, when the heart chambers change. And Sanjiao is that energy is only kick-started at the first suckling. So when a baby first takes that action of suckling, that's when 3-heater energy is said to start. So that's very much on Earth. It's not a heavenly attribute. So we're still looking at the stems and more in terms of heaven and how the organs are influenced by the planets. So then we come to what are the stems. Shi Tian Gan, and this is the 10 celestial stems. Each stem is made up of a great movement and an organ. So if we put the two together, you've got yang and yin, you've got the great movements in the yang phase, you've got the great movements in the yin phase. And then you have the order of the organs in the yang phase. And there you have gallbladder, liver, small intestine, heart. And earth, again, you know, we're moving from yang to yin. So you've got this aspect of earth as a transition. And that earth transition aspect and dynamic is quite important because the first part is the yang of earth, stomach, and then it continues with spleen, the yin of earth, and consolidate what's happened with the yang and start moving it into the yin. And then you have colon and lung, bladder and kidney. So the stem is going to be, gone too far. The combination of both of those, so you have each stem that has an organ and has a great movement. So you have, for example, gallbladder in earth. And they each have a name, liver in metal, small intestine in water, heart in wood, stomach in fire. Spleen in earth, colon in metal, lung in water, bladder in wood, kidney in fire. Now, those of you with a 5-element background, it's, you know, why are they all different? But it's just trying to get you to know that it's perspective. We're layering different cycles on top of each other and understanding that they all have a certain influence. And it's a little bit like, and what we're doing is, especially with life, life is said to be 3 dimensions, but the energies are 5 dimensions. So we're trying to play a 5-dimensional game in 3 dimensions, so it doesn't quite fit, which is quite nice, because it doesn't mean everything has to fit. It doesn't need to make sense. It can be different and it can be confusing, but and this is where the art comes into it. So it's understanding what you need to do with the 5 dimensions with that person in front of you that is 3 dimensions. So we've got an organ and a great movement, and each one is quite unique and has its own unique energetic dynamic. So the first one, gallbladder in earth, is Jia, and there's a character for it, and this character is representative of a root or germ in its protective skin, a bud in a protective shelf, on the point of breaking out, not quite breaking out. And the meaning of it is, it's like a pine tree, a symbol of coming out and of growth. But it's only a symbol of coming out. The growth hasn't started yet. And in nature we see this as yang moves in the east, and to sprout seeds from the winter. So it's that moment of starting, just before that moment of starting. And we're going to go through the others. I've set them all out in a very similar fashion. Liver in metal, Yi, and the character here is, now there's some movement, a shoot leaving the skin. So you've got the first part of yang and the wood of yang, gallbladder, just giving you this idea of a potential, and then the yin is everything consolidated and in action. And this is, the meaning of it is, it means it's bamboo. And what does bamboo do? Bamboo grows very fast and it grows very strong. It's a tremendous plant, and for those that have sort of visited China especially, they use it in scaffolding. And they're building these skyscrapers with bamboo. But, you look at it and you're thinking, it's going to fall, but it doesn't. And they do it. So it's this consolidated strength. It's ready, it's growing, it's coming out fast and strong. And in nature, this is seen in a twisted plant or a twig. So when a plant first starts to emerge, it's not nice and clear and straight. There's a certain, it still needs to unwind. And that unwinding potential is like ready to go. The third stem is Bing, small intestine in water. And here the character depicts more, there's a fire in the house, or like a fireplace, the housing of the power of fire. So you've got a certain potential there, but it's kept in control, it's held in a certain way. And the meaning of it is the flame of a wooden torch. And in nature, we see this in flowers, and when flowers blossom. The fourth stem is Ding, heart in wood. And here we have this, the character is that of the sting of a bee. And it's, or a nail, and is a combination of fire and the material from which it is made. So there's a certain substance behind it. So it's not just the fire, it's all of it, it's the whole picture. Where does it come from? Where does this fire come from? And the meaning of it is flame of an oil lamp. So it's not just the flame we're considering, we're also looking at the oil. What's the substance underneath it? And in nature, this is vegetation in the wet season. The fifth stem is Wu. And here we have a hand holding a cutting instrument. So we're just starting. It's just starting this, getting ready for harvesting. So we're past the yang phase. We've reached the peak of yang. We're going into the yin, and now things are on the verge of starting to pull in. And the meaning is mountains and hills. And in nature, this depicts abundance. And it's at this moment the end of life begins. So at the start of the yin phase. So then the 6 is spleen in earth, Ji. And here the character is of a thread of warp and woof, which is used in weaving. So there's a certain strength to it still, but it's ready to be put into a different action, and it's a sign of full blossoming. And the meaning here is flat and level plain. And in nature, it denotes abundance. And you now start to make the first connection with winter and hibernation. It's the first hint that something's getting ready for winter. And the 7th is colon in metal. And here we have the character is two hands holding and moving something. So this is it gives you this idea of a certain action in threshing rice. And when do you thresh rice? You thresh rice at a certain point in a year, which is relating to harvesting and gathering. And the meaning is metal and weapons. Remember, colon in metal, you've got this metal dynamic. The great movement is metal. And one of the things associated with metal is this idea of weapons also. Weapons and punishment. So in nature, this is fullness of vegetation. Now we have a crop, now we have some fruit. And now it's ready to be harvested. 8th stem is Zin, lung in water. And now this is a different dynamic to the great movement metal. And the character here with the organ is to denote attack, punishment, a time for death penalties, a time. This is, you reflect on the year. What's happened over the year? You take things on. You then decide, what do you need to take on from this year? What do you need to leave behind from this year? And that forms your seed for the next year. So this can happen if you're on a farm, but it can also happen to you in your thoughts and how you want to go on into next year. But all that planning starts in the autumn. And why is it, you get this sort of movement in autumn time where everything starts to come in. And people tend to be in a more reflective mood. It's a natural order of things. And that reflective mood goes a lot deeper into winter, and you take those thoughts, and why do we have a New Year's resolution? It's because you've decided and you've pondered and you thought, okay, what do I need to go on into the new year with? And that whole process starts back in autumn. The meaning of it is a kettle or a cooking pan, and it's in nature it's ripe fruit, but which tastes like metal. So you've got a certain edge to that taste. And it's seen as also in nature this punishment is needed to protect the harvest. So you need to make some hard choices to also make sure that your harvest is safe. The 9th stem is Ren, bladder in wood. And here we have this idea of the character, a man carrying a yoke on his shoulders and fatigued by his troubles. It doesn't have to be a man, it can be a woman as well, but it gives you this idea of the weight of the world on your shoulders and how this particular stem has that dynamic to it, that strength to it. And when you see people with this kind of, with this energy, they're able to take on a lot. And because they're able to take on a lot, they do take on a lot, but then it can just, in that moment, be too much, and then it all falls. So it's trying to get a better understanding of, yes, you're taking on a lot, and you're happy to do so, but there's only a finite amount of troubles or weight that an individual can take on. And the meaning here is that of waves and a swell. And in nature, this is yin at its peak. The 10th stem is gui, and the character here is grass mats on which offerings are made. So an acknowledgement of your ancestors, and to put things into perspective. You've come to the end of the cycle, you're there by a certain virtue. And it's a giving thanks to the past. The meaning here, ripple the stream. If we think of where it is in the scheme of things, everything is now still. There's a certain stillness to everything. And in nature is when water is absorbed by the earth. Yang starting to prepare itself for springtime. So there's always this idea that things are happening now, but they're also happening now to prepare you for what's to come. There's a certain order to all of this. And the 12 branches, Shi, Di, Zi. The books I'm going to just mention right at the end, I've just found out yesterday that there will now be a book specifically on the 12 branches by Dr. Karen Wu. So I think Singing Dragon are going to be publishing that. So there should be a lot more information on that. Now the branches should be a lot more familiar to most of you. And this is now the 5 elements as on Earth. So just to remind that we've got a certain 5-element picture. Now when we put the organs into it, this, if it's not familiar to you, I think it should be, so I won't go over it. You've got all the 5 elements and the organs associated with those 5 elements. And we also now have, because it's branches and it's to do with what's happening on Earth, we now have Sanjiao, 3-heater, and pericardium also in the picture. We've got the other 10 as well, and now we've got the 12. And the branches relate to more the activity on Earth, and therefore the seasons. So you've got each of the elements relating to a season, spring, summer, late summer, autumn, and winter. And this is a slightly different picture of it, where you see, if we look at the branches, there's a movement of the branches from liver, gallbladder, liver, lung, colon, stomach, spleen, heart, small intestine, bladder, kidney, pericardium, 3-heater. And it goes through a certain order on Earth. And another way we see this is in the cycle of a day, the Chinese clock, where everything starts with gallbladder. It can start anywhere, but we're talking about a cycle, so we choose to start it. Where will it be at its peak? Between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. The middle of that is midnight. Everything is going to start at midnight, gallbladder. And the movement of energy through the day. So this movement goes in every 2 hours. There are 12 branches. 2 hours each gives you a 24-hour cycle. And you've also got a yin aspect to all of this, a yin aspect and a yang aspect and a yin aspect. And it keeps moving. So we've got certain cycles in heaven that keep moving, and different layers of them. And now we're looking at Earth, and they're also moving. And it's in a forward direction. So now, seasonal energy. So we've got a certain order to the branches. But if we start with winter, so I'll start with spring. Start with spring. You've got spring relating to wood, but with the movement of the branches, that order is always the same. We now get this relationship that wood and spring are related to the lung and colon. And possess a certain dynamic. that is related to wood. Now, you would know them as relating to metal, lung and colon. But if they only related to metal, you would only get contraction. The lungs, to be working and to be able to give life, need contraction and need expansion. So you've got the wood dynamic of expansion in the lungs giving you both aspects. One is a heavenly dynamic and the other is an earthly dynamic, and we need both to enable. Same with the colon. I won't go into any graphic details of how that works, but you get the idea. Then the seasonal energy, that spring energy then it keeps moving, but it goes to earth as a transformation phase. And at that particular point in the cycle, it relates to the stomach. Then we move on into summer, and spleen and heart are related to the energy of summer and fire. Then we go into earth again for transformation, and it's the small intestine this time. Then it goes on into autumn and metal, and now bladder and kidney. And I'll give you a contrast with the kidney. If you look at the physiology of the kidney, it has a metallic dynamic to it. It deals with fluid, but it really decides what it needs to get rid of and recycle and keep and nourish the body. It's a very metallic action that goes on in the kidneys. We then go into earth transformation phase, and this time it's the pericardium, and finally that moves us into winter, and it's gallbladder and 3-heater relating to winter and water. So now you've got the energies of the branches relating to the seasons, that the gallbladder is related to winter and water, liver is earth, spring is lung and colon, stomach is earth, spleen and heart's related to summer and fire, small intestine is earth, bladder and kidney autumn and metal, then you've got pericardium. So you've got a movement going through and how the energies of the season are affecting the organs. We've also got an idea of how the great movements are affecting the organs. So we've got an energy from above and an energy from below. And then just to give you this idea that it's still the process behind all of this is yin and yang. So this idea is earth as transformation. You'll see this also in Machocho's book. There's this type of diagram where you've got the elements or the seasons and earth just before. 18 days that the energy is in earth before transforming into the next season. And another 18 days before summer, another 18 days before autumn, another 18 days. So put all 18 days together and that gives you 1/5 of the year. So this movement of energy in regards to earth and the seasons always needs to go back to earth. And this is when people start to talk about, especially in classical acupuncture, a seasonal treatment. What is a seasonal treatment? Depends, first of all, which season you're in. And is that person reflecting the energy of that season or not? If they're not, you get them back in to that season. And or time of day. So something like using Harari points. And if you're getting them ready, they're fit and well, you start to prepare them for the next season. And the best way to prepare them, but the best time to see those patients is in those 18 days of earth transformation. And if we're going into spring, I'd probably be wanting to use earth points. And if we go back to just before spring, we can see that it's earth, and the organ associated at that time is the liver. So trying to look at, can I use any of the points on the liver to help this person through? And if they're in very good health, it's the earth point on the liver that you want to use, because that actually puts them right back into that earth energy and it connects them back up, and so forth. So you can get quite creative with this. And if we look at it in the round picture, it's if they are out of balance, then you go to the opposite. So if things are really not right just before spring, we might go to small intestine to see if we can use the energy of small intestine to balance what is not happening in the liver, because it's out of balance.
How do you know when you're 18 days before a new season?
See, I knew you'd be trouble, Susan. I almost said...
When a new season is starting, never mind 18 days prior.
No, there's a calendar. There's a calendar.
No, it's different every year.
No, there's a calendar.
The weather is different every year. The climate is different. It's different.
It doesn't mean that the energy is different every year. What we see is never exact. And if it's supposed to be cool today, because this is the season that we're supposed to be in, and it's very hot, there's something not right. And that in itself creates an imbalance. If it's cool today and it's supposed to be cool today, okay, good. It doesn't always work that way. So you've got the 24 compass points on the solar calendar, and each one is very accurate in what it describes. And you look at that to see, are you in the right place? And it tells you when there's an energetic change and when things are going into an earth phase. And you look to see. And if today it hasn't quite reached that earth phase, you know it's a little bit slow. Something is not right. It's not precise. The energy is precise, but its manifestation is not precise. And this is where you have to work with it. This is where your artistry comes into it. If you're trying to do something and you've only got certain tools to do it with, you do the best that you can. Doesn't mean shouldn't stop you creating. So and it is artistry, because you have to have the capability of taking that on board to then help your patient, because you've booked them, last month or whenever it is. Oh, come in that time because Sam said that's a good time for me to see you. And they come and it's blazing sunshine outside, and it's not supposed to be like that. So we try and do the best we can. My goal as an acupuncturist is to have all of my patients fit and well. And I only work 4 times a year for 18 days because they're all fit and well, and I keep them fit and well. I haven't got there yet. When I do, I'll be back up here and say, this is how you do it. And the rest of the time, it will be playing golf on the estate here. So each of these branches has its own energetic dynamic, and this energy is according to its element phase and its seasonal energy. Again, we've got two aspects to it. And for example, the branch gallbladder, we know it's wood, and I've also just explained that it's also related to winter and water. And looking at each branch individually, I'm going to zip through these because I'll only really be talking about the character. This is a character of a small child, birth, seed, starting point. So you've got this idea of it's just beginning. So each of the sides will have other aspects to it, and will tell you other things related to it as well. And then we have second branch, Chu. Now, the stems are always written in number form, and the branch is always written with Roman numerals. Just to distinguish, if you're just using numbers, you know that you're referring to for people that are lazy, don't want to write everything out. If you're just writing numbers, it's two different numbering systems, so you know which one is a stem and which one is a branch. Here, the second branch, chu. This is two hands binding together, supporting the growth of young plants. So now with branches, and this is what's happening in terms of the energy on Earth and the action on Earth. Then we have lung, branch, yin, two hands meeting under a shelter, and this is paying respect and greeting. And the lung is the first branch to appear in the new year, in Chinese New Year. So this is the start of spring and the celebration of the new year. Everything's starting. It's now visible. So the other two were the invisible beginnings, and now we've got a visible beginning. And then colon, this is an open door, and plants now start to shoot up out of the earth. Then it's chen, expansion, thunderstorm. First vegetation in the growing season, and this relates to the branch stomach, chen. Spleen, C, a fully formed embryo. And the character there also denotes that it's a snake, and the animal associated with that is also the snake. Wu, heart, character here is opposition, symbolizing a certain strength, starting of yin, origin of the female, a hidden growth. Wei, small intestine, a big tree with fully grown branches, and the flavor of fruit, full bloom. Shen, two hands firmly holding a rope, closing together, things starting to come together, relating to bladder. Yu, this is kidney. This is a vase in which grain is being fermented, cider or wine press. The 11th is shu. This is injury from a weapon, destruction, preparing the earth for the next sowing season. It's pericardium. Hai. This is the 12th branch. Sanjiao, small three-heater. And this is a man and woman hiding under a shelter. A favorable time for conception. And winter. So now we've got two simultaneous cycles, one heavenly and one earthly. Stems and branches. And the next step is how these two interact. And there's a saying that it's heaven sends an instruction down and earth sends a reply back. And we stand between heaven and earth, and we're upright because we're the conduit between heaven and earth. So you've got this dynamic of a spiral of energy coming down with a certain dynamic, but also going back up with a certain dynamic. And in the books you'll see this is a full stems and branches chart. So you'll see across the top the numbers 1 to 10, each one relating to a stem, and you see down the side 1 to 12 in Roman, each one relating to the branches. So for the yearly picture, each one, so if we start with the first stem and first branch, you can have a cycle starting in 1924 or 1984, and the next cycle due to start there will be in 2044. 60-year cycles, that is 0.1. So that's the first of 60 years. And it goes through, so then it's 2 and 2, 3 and 3, 4 and 4, and it cycles through because the cycle of the stems is a certain dynamic, and the cycle of the branches is a certain dynamic. And where the two meet is the interaction and the impact that is said to be on us. So in that first year, you've got a certain energetic impact of the gallbladder as a stem, jia, and Z, also the gallbladder as a branch. And as you go through, you can see that the interactions will continue to change for all 60 years, or all 60 months, or all 60 days, or 60 hours. And when you're looking at the full picture, you're looking at all four pillars together to see the interaction. So if we take an example of someone born in 1986, their stem is Bing, small intestine in water, and the branch is lung, yin. And the energies that they're going to be under the influence of are, I'm only taking a small sample of the chart. So at the top you've got the stems, and down the side we've got the branches. And we're going to start with 1984. That's the first point in the starting of this next 60-year cycle. And 1985 would go there. And we're going to be looking at this person in 1986. So small intestine in water, Bing is their stem, and yin, lung, is their branch. So what do we know about these? Small intestine in water. Great movements are said to be the biggest energetic influence on us. So this person will have quite an impact of water in what might be happening to them. But his small intestine also, that has this certain connection to fire and also to earth. So fire in 5 elements, earth in terms of seasonal energy. Their branch is lung, and we know that lung has an association with the stems with its great movement, water, and in 5 elements, metal, but also wood. So you've got wood being predominant with the lungs, small intestine predominant with water predominant with small intestine. So we're looking out. In our diagnosis, do we find that there's any correlation? And you're going to go back and see, okay, let me see if I can work something out here, and nothing's going to fit. Because we're dealing with people. And this is not to give you an idea of how to fit people into a box, but it gives you a certain idea of the movement of what might be happening to get them here. Yeah. So if we establish that, okay, you know what, maybe I think there's something happening with this person's stem, you then need a certain strategy to deal with it. So if we're always talking about yin and yang, and if something's wrong with the yang, you concentrate and work on the yin. Yeah, and this is what we also do with the stems. So if something's happening with small intestine, it's small intestine in water. So what do we need to balance that great movement? What's its yin counterpart? Its yin counterpart is lung in water. So maybe using points on the lung to balance what's going on. But is that imbalance in small intestine leading to lung conditions? So you're not only looking at any pathology with the small intestine, but you're also looking to see if there's any pathology with the respiratory system, the lungs. In a similar way, but okay, there's not just that, that's quite direct balancing, but if there's a certain weakness in the small intestine, then we need to feed it. We need to keep the cycle moving. So how do we, if there's a weakness, what do we need to do? We go to the one before, liver, and see, okay, is liver able to feed and supply and nourish energy to the small intestine? At the same time, is small intestine able to receive that energy? Is there a blockage? Is there a stagnation there? And is that affecting the bigger cycle in what's going on? If the big cycles are affected, the smaller cycles will also be affected. If there's a blockage between the small intestine and the heart, or water and wood, so you can look at it on very many different levels. And if you find that, okay, something's not right here, what do I need to do? Then you can use points to free that up, get that moving. And it's trying to keep this idea of movement of qi all the time in your patients. And this 1986 person the branch is lung. Similar again. Does it need feeding? In which case, what we need to do here is liver. Is it stuck? Does it need freeing up? Do we need to work on the colon? And try to get the movement back. You can also go to its opposite. The opposite to the lungs in branches is the bladder. So, do we see anything happening with the energy of the bladder?
Can I just ask you, the coding of the colour, does that relate to a particular planet?
Yes, the inner circle. Yeah. If you go back, when you get this, if you go back in the slides, you'll see that the inner circle does relate to the 5-element cycle and maps directly back to the planets. The outer circle is more to do with what's happening on Earth and the seasons. Yeah, so that particular picture gives you the both together, because that heavenly influence is still there. It still forms part of the liver and the lung. You can't forget it. And the idea is you recognize that one organ has different aspects to it.
So you would technically go back further, as it were. So you'd look at the organs and then the planets.
Yeah, and I think this is the idea of what acupuncturists do all the time. We don't go in and look at what's happening on a cellular level. Yeah, and we don't have specialists that are hip specialists or knee specialists or ENT and this, that, and the other. What we do constantly is step back and step back and step back. So when your patient comes in and you say, okay, what's happening here, here, and here? Okay, physically they're telling you I've got aches and pains. But then you go on to ask what's happening with work, your relationships, and you try to get a bigger picture each time. And very often, by you asking a certain question, really frames it all. Why are they getting headaches? Because this is also happening in their life, and you're stepping back. You're not asking where you're getting the headaches and let me look at that part of your brain. We're going back and back and back. So hopefully this gives you a bit of an idea of what stems and branches is. It's a lot more complex than that. But I didn't want to sort of come here and get technical. I just wanted to give you an intro to it on actually how are the cycles made up? What does it mean? The books there are 4 books. The first one by Peter Van Kervel, Royce Golding, Master Wu. So the first one is much more about application. It gives you some background, but it just steps forward into application. Royce's is very well referenced, and it gives you the context of where all this is coming from. And Master Wu's is quite poetic, and it goes right back into the history of stems and branches. And he has a certain connection with the history of all of this through his family. And I just met him yesterday, and his wife's going to be doing the book on the 12 branches. So there's something else. And another good one for diagrams, and to start to understand diagrams, and not just some of the ones I've shown you, but some of the much older ones, which really do form what we do now is just a book of diagrams. It's by Philosophical and Clinical Tools by Aram Sayigh. I always like pictures, so and that sometimes it gives you a very quick idea of what might be happening. So those 4 are out there if anyone wants to sort of follow up and start looking into any of this. But as I said, this will be should be on the BAC website. I don't know how they're going to do it, but I'm sure they'll do it. Yeah. We've got 5 minutes.
Okay,
Any
can I
questions?
ask a quick question?
You can.
I'm vaguely familiar with stems and branches and doing blood and iron research.
You're with many others because a lot of our students are vaguely familiar.
Okay, I just want to say that on the Great Movement, when you're working out somebody's year,
Yeah.
okay, and we can see all the influences of the stem, the branch, the inner energy,
Yeah.
the guest heaven, guest earth, when nothing shows up, like, for instance, if I use my own example of stomach in fire,
Yeah.
there's no metal and there's no wood. So are they does that mean they're deficient?
No.
They don't have an influence?
No, and that's a common misconception,
Yeah.
that if an energy is missing, that you're deficient or lacking in that particular energy. It can mean that you're not susceptible to those energies being attacked.
That answers the question.
You can look at it in
Yeah.
actually both ways.
Yeah.
There can be an element of it's not there, and but also it's so if someone has that missing and they come and they have an ailment in that organ, for example, from a practitioner point of view, you already know that, okay, you know what, I can fix this. It hasn't affected their core energy.
Yeah, good.
It won't affect, it won't have a ripple effect from then on. If you find out that something is affected their core energy, their stem, in your case, stomach, if there's an issue with stomach, it's much more difficult to resolve because it's such a strong impact.
Yeah.
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 For you
makes sense.
in particular.
Yeah.
It's so, and if you establish that something's happening with the branches, it's difficult to help them, but it's not as difficult as working on the stem. You're working on the branch, and there's divisions as well. So there's a certain order which actually helps you with your prognosis.
Yeah.
So when your patient comes and says, I've got this, what do you reckon? Then you can say, you know what, actually I think we can get you on track quite swiftly.
Yeah.
Or actually, you know what, I think this might take a little bit of time.
Difficult, yeah. Thank you.
How you say
Yeah.
that is
Thank you.
it's not so easy, is
Thank
it?
Thank you, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? One more.
Hi, Marcus Mason. You mentioned the date when all the planets were lined up.
Yeah.
Do you remember what that is?
No. 2637 BC.
Thank you.
I think it's time for lunch. Thank you.